He was out with friends, and she whispered my name. That night, nothing else existed but us. The evening had settled with the soft rhythm of rain against the window panes, each drop tapping like a gentle heartbeat that echoed in the quiet of her apartment. I had just returned from a long day, my mind still half lingering on work and the mundane chatter of friends, when my phone buzzed. It was her. Unexpected, brief, almost hesitant. He's out with friends. I could use some company. I froze, my fingers hovering over the screen. There was something in the phrasing, so casual, so intimate at the same time, that made my heart skip. I knew her world was often quiet, sometimes lonely, yet in that single line, she had opened a door to something I couldn't quite name. My mind raced. Did I go? Would it be inappropriate? And yet, curiosity, concern, and something deeper pull me forward. By the time I reach her building, the rain had turned from a drizzle to a soft mist, misting the sidewalks and coating the leaves in tiny, sparkling beads. I shook off my jacket and rung the bell, feeling a strange tension in my chest, a mixture of anticipation and restraint. When the door opened, she stood there, framed by the warm, golden glow of her apartment lights, her hair slightly damp from the mist, a soft scarf wrapped loosely around her shoulders. She smiled, small, gentle, and somehow vulnerable, and stepped aside to let me in. The apartment smelled of coffee and vanilla, familiar and comforting. She gestured to the living room, where a single lamp cast soft shadows on the walls. The rain continued its quiet symphony outside, but inside, there was a different rhythm, one that was slower, quieter, more deliberate. We didn't speak at first. She settled on the couch, her posture relaxed but subtly inviting, and I sat opposite her, close enough that our knees almost brushed. That near contact sent a warmth through me, a silent reminder that something fragile, delicate, and important was beginning here. She handed me a cup of coffee, our fingers briefly touching. The spark was brief, fleeting, yet undeniable, like the brush of a soft breeze across bare skin. She looked at me, her eyes reflecting the golden light of the lamp, and for a moment, I saw the weariness she carried, the loneliness she tried to hide behind composed gestures and polite smiles. "I didn't want to be alone tonight," she murmured, almost apologetically. There was no flirtation in her tone, no expectation, only honesty. I nodded, unsure of what to say, yet deeply aware that my presence mattered more than words. We sat in companionable silence, listening to the rain, feeling the quiet intimacy of two people sharing space and time. Every movement, her reaching for her cup, the soft brush of her sleeve against mine, was heightened, charged with subtle attention. My mind buzzed with questions, but my heart quietly knew. This night, this moment was a beginning. By the time she glanced at me again, I realized something simple yet profound. She had invited me into more than her apartment. She had invited me into a space of trust, a pocket of vulnerability, and, perhaps unknowingly, the start of something neither of us fully understood yet. And as I took a slow sip of coffee, I felt the quiet stirrings of something I couldn't name, but which I knew would not fade with the rain. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle by the time I settled more comfortably on the couch. She moved across the room, pulling a blanket over the armrest and tucking herself in, and I couldn't help but notice how naturally her presence filled the space. Calm, composed, yet quietly magnetic. The apartment felt warmer now, not just from the soft glow of the lamp, but from the subtle tension between us, the kind that doesn't demand attention but grows slowly, steadily, like a flame under kindling. She began to speak, almost tentatively at first, about the week she'd had. Her voice was calm, but carried a softness I hadn't noticed before, a vulnerability that didn't diminish her confidence, but made her real in a way I hadn't been allowed to see. She talked about small frustrations, the subtle loneliness in her routine, the ways her husband often seemed distant despite being physically present. I listened, not interrupting, my gaze occasionally brushing hers, catching the flicker of honesty in her eyes. At one point, she laughed, a sound so unguarded that it made me pause. It was rare, warm, almost musical, and it echoed against the walls of the apartment, chasing away the rain's somber rhythm. I laughed too, unsure why her amusement felt like an invitation, why her comfort with me made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't anticipated. Her hand rested on the blanket, and I instinctively inched closer so that our legs were brushing. She didn't move away. Instead, she shifted slightly, her knee now gently pressing against mine. It was subtle, almost accidental, but my skin registered it like a spark. Conversation turned to memories, small anecdotes of our shared past, moments we had laughed together or confided in one another. Every story she shared felt intimate, like she was slowly letting me into the corners of herself she didn't reveal to anyone else. The more I listened, the more I realized how much I wanted to be there, not as a casual friend, but as someone who mattered deeply, quietly. I found myself leaning in when she spoke, catching every nuance of her expressions, the slight twitch of her lips, the tilt of her head, the way her hair fell across her face. At one point, she reached for the blanket again, and our fingers brushed. Just a fleeting touch, but enough to make my heart beat faster, enough to make me aware of the charged silence between us. She glanced up at me, eyes soft, and smiled. Not the polite, restrained smile of before, but something warmer, acknowledging, almost conspiratorial. I realized then that the distance between us wasn't just physical anymore. It had begun to collapse, slowly, delicately, in the spaces between words and the glances and the laughter, and in the touch that neither of us pulled away from. The rain continued outside, a gentle backdrop to the growing intimacy in the room. For a few quiet moments, it felt as though the world had shrunk to this apartment, to this shared space, to the unspoken understanding forming between us. And in that realization, I understood the fragile beauty of the night, that we were beginning something neither of us had expected, and yet both of us, silently, insistently, wanted it to continue. The rain had almost stopped by the time the evening deepened into a soft, hushed quiet. Outside, the streets glistened faintly, reflecting the amber glow of streetlights. Inside her apartment, the space between us had shifted, less measured, more electric, though neither of us dared name it aloud. We sat together on the couch, the blanket from earlier draped over both our legs. Her shoulder brushed mine, intentionally or not, and the contact sent a subtle warmth through me that I couldn't ignore. She picked up the small stereo in the corner and let soft music fill the room. A slow, instrumental piece that seemed to stretch time itself. It wrapped around us like a delicate veil. The sound was low but persistent, providing a rhythm for our conversation, or for the silences that had become just as meaningful. She looked at me then, her eyes catching the lamp's glow, and I felt that familiar pull of curiosity mixed with longing. "Stay a little longer," she murmured, almost as an afterthought, yet there was weight behind it. I wanted to argue, to insist I should leave, but something in her tone stopped me. It wasn't just loneliness, it was trust, it was a quiet plea, and I found myself leaning back slightly so that our shoulders brushed. She didn't move. Our proximity was natural now, easy, yet charged. Each small gesture, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the way her fingers lingered near mine as she adjusted the blanket, felt like communication deeper than words. We talked about small things, seemingly trivial, childhood memories, favorite books, movies we had loved. But beneath the surface of casual conversation, there was a silent exchange. Every glance lasted a fraction longer than necessary. Every smile seemed to hint at something unspoken. She laughed softly at one of my anecdotes, and I realized I'd stopped focusing on the words entirely. I was attuned to her presence, the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the way her perfume mingled with the faint scent of the rain outside. At one point, our hands brushed again. This time, it lingered, not long enough to force confrontation, but long enough that the warmth spread from my palm into my chest. I noticed the quickening of my heartbeat, the way her gaze caught mine almost instinctively. Her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to speak, yet she remained silent, letting the tension hang in the air. There was an intimacy in that silence, a hunger neither of us dared voice. I wanted to reach out, to touch her cheek lightly, to feel the warmth of her skin, but hesitation held me back. She shifted slightly closer, sensing the pull, and our knees pressed together fully now. Her hand rested near mine, a quiet invitation but also a test. For a long moment, we simply existed like that, two people suspended in the quiet, caught between hesitation and desire, each fully aware of the tension simmering beneath casual conversation. It wasn't about lust, it was about closeness, about understanding, about realizing that the connection forming between us could no longer be contained by words alone. And yet, both of us stayed careful, savoring the unspoken, the gentle brush of warmth that promised something deeper was waiting, just beyond reach. By the end of the evening, the space between us had collapsed, and I knew, with both thrill and fear, that nothing would ever feel quite the same again. The room was quieter now, the music having faded to soft background hums, and the rain had completely stopped, leaving only the faint scent of wet earth drifting through the slightly cracked window. We sat closer than before, our knees brushing more deliberately onto the shared blanket. The dim lamp cast a soft, golden light over her features, highlighting the curve of her jaw, the subtle warmth in her eyes, and the gentle curve of her lips when she smiled at me. For the first time that night, the air between us felt charged with intention. She spoke, her voice a low murmur, not hurried or nervous, but intimate, almost confessional. "I feel alive around you," she admitted, her eyes not leaving mine. There was no hint of flirtation, only honesty, vulnerability, and trust. Her words were small, but heavy, like a key turning slowly in a lock. I swallowed, my own chest tight, knowing exactly what she meant because I felt it too. Every moment with her had been building to this fragile, trembling point. I reached for her hand, slowly, deliberately, as if to check if the world still allowed for such contact. My fingers traced hers lightly, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she let her hand rest against mine, palm to palm, thumb brushing softly across the back of my hand. That simple touch, innocent to anyone else, felt monumental. It was the first time we acknowledged the pull between us not with words, but with skin. Her eyes softened, and she tilted her head slightly, letting her hair fall over her shoulder in a way that brushed against my cheek. The warmth of her presence enveloped me, quiet but insistent, making it impossible to think of leaving. I wanted to reach out, to touch her face gently, to feel the texture of her skin against mine, but I hesitated, acutely aware of the weight of this moment. Instead, I rested my cheek near her hair, breathing in the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the vanilla candle that still burned softly on the coffee table. She moved closer, almost imperceptibly, until her shoulder pressed gently against mine. Her proximity was deliberate, but tender, an invitation without demand. I could feel the steadiness of her breathing, the subtle rise of her chest as she sat, and the quiet heartbeat of her hand still resting in mine. There was no rush, no urgency, just the slow, deliberate intimacy of two people finally allowing themselves to feel. We stayed like that for a long while, silent but entirely present. I felt her head brush against my shoulder, a fleeting yet deliberate gesture that carried more meaning than words ever could. My hand shifted to her back, resting lightly, almost protectively. In that embrace, I realized the truth. The connection we had been building all evening had finally found its first concrete expression. For the first time that night, I sensed that we were no longer just two people sharing space. We were quietly, undeniably intertwined. Every glance, every touch, every unspoken word had led us here. And in that slow, steady heartbeat of the night, I understood that the first honest touch, small, deliberate, and infinitely meaningful, was only the beginning of something neither of us could, or wanted to, turn back from. The soft glow of the lamp made the room feel like its own universe, insulated from the chill of the evening outside. The rain had stopped hours ago, leaving only the gentle whisper of wind brushing against the window. Yet inside, time seemed to stretch and slow, as if the world outside had ceased to exist. I was sitting beside her, closer now than I ever imagined I could be, the blanket still draped across both our laps, and the air between us was thick with unspoken feelings. She leaned slightly toward me, her shoulder brushing against mine again. Her warmth was steady, comforting, and intoxicating all at once. We spoke less this time, letting silence fill the gaps between words, each pause more meaningful than any sentence we could have formed. I could feel the rhythm of her breathing, the subtle rise and fall of her chest, and the soft beat of her hand resting near mine. My hand itched to close the small distance, to feel the warmth of her skin fully, but restraint had become part of the intimacy. The waiting, the hesitation, it made everything more vivid, more alive. Eventually, she spoke, softly, vulnerably. "I haven't felt this scene in a long time," she admitted, her eyes glimmering with emotion. It wasn't a casual confession. It was a revelation, a quiet surrender of the walls she carried. I reached out instinctively, gently lifting her chin, letting my thumb trace her cheek lightly. Her eyes held mine, wide and unguarded, and I saw something that made my chest ache, a mixture of longing, relief, and trust. Her hand lifted, brushing against my sleeve, then lingering near my wrist. I let my fingers rest over hers, our palms warm together, our hands communicating what words could not. The music from earlier was still faint in the background, soft and unobtrusive, yet felt like it had been written for this very moment, an invisible thread tying us closer. We began talking again, this time about the hidden corners of our lives, regrets, dreams, and the parts of ourselves that the world never saw. She confessed quietly about the ways she had compromised for others, the little pieces of herself she had put aside. I listened, captivated not only by her words, but by the way she allowed herself to be vulnerable with me. I felt a fierce desire to protect her, to hold her, and to be trusted in a way that mattered. Then, a small tear escaped her eye, and without thinking, I reached forward, brushing it away with my thumb. Her gaze softened, and she leaned slightly into my touch, her forehead almost brushing mine. The warmth radiating from her pressed into me, her head resting lightly against my shoulder for the briefest of moments. I wanted to say something to make it permanent, but all I could do was hold her closer, my hand sliding gently to the small of her back. In that instant, everything outside, the world, obligations, expectations, fell away. It was just us, just the quiet intimacy of presence, touch, and the electric pull of emotions that had been simmering all evening. I realized, with a mix of thrill and awe, that this closeness, this undeniable bond, had become both a sanctuary and a temptation. A near kiss hung in the space between us, unspoken, dangerous in its subtlety, and I knew that if either of us crossed that line tonight, nothing could ever return to the way it was. Yet, even in that suspended moment, I understood the truth. Some connections are so profound, so delicate, that they don't need words or gestures to declare their intensity. They simply exist, palpable, in the space between two hearts that have finally found each other. By late evening, the quiet of her apartment had transformed into something almost sacred, a world suspended between shadows and the soft amber glow of the lamps. Outside, the city slept under a silver wash of moonlight, but inside, time seemed to stretch and fold around us. The closeness we had nurtured all night had grown into something more palpable, an unspoken urgency that neither of us dared name aloud. Every glance, every subtle brush of skin, carried a weight that made my chest ache with anticipation. She shifted slightly on the couch, her head brushing my shoulder, and I felt the warmth of her presence settle against me like a tangible thing. Her hand found mine, deliberately this time, fingers entwining, and the simple contact made my heartbeat spike. It was no longer a tentative touch. It was a declaration, quiet but resolute. I felt the steady rhythm of her pulse beneath my palm, a reminder that this was real, alive, and undeniably hers to give. "I don't want to be alone anymore," she murmured, her voice almost breaking, yet steady enough that I could hear the truth behind it. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, and I knew exactly what she was saying. I wanted to respond, to confess the same ache that had been building in me all evening, but I paused, letting the moment breathe. I lifted her hand to my lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles, savoring the warmth and the trust embedded in that gesture. Her eyes searched mine, soft and vulnerable, and I felt the tension of the night settle into something deeper. Fear, longing, and desire all entwined. We leaned into each other, foreheads touching, breaths mingling. The air between us was thick, not with lust, but with connection, the kind of intimacy that forms in quiet rooms, in whispered admissions, in touches that linger long after hands separate. I could feel her trembling slightly against me, and I tightened my embrace, offering steadiness, warmth, and a silent promise that she wasn't alone. Every small gesture, the way her hand rested against my chest, the subtle tilt of her head, the fleeting brush of her lips near my temple, was electric. The tension of unspoken desire hovered at the edges of everything, teasing, intoxicating, yet held in check by mutual respect and the fear of crossing an invisible line. It was a delicate balance, closeness without rushing, intimacy without words, a slow dance of hearts that had finally found each other. For a long moment, we simply existed in that fragile space, our bodies pressed together, breath steadying, hearts sinking. I could feel the steady rise and fall of her chest against mine, the subtle warmth of her skin, and the soft brush of her hair against my temple. Everything outside, the world, expectations, the ticking of the clock, had disappeared. It was just us, suspended in a perfect, fleeting universe of trust, vulnerability, and connection. Then, as if both of us understood that this night was both a peak and a threshold, we held each other tighter, foreheads pressed together, eyes closed, letting the intensity of the moment settle into something quiet but profound. No words were necessary. Our hearts spoke in the silence. It was a night of edge and revelation, of yearning restrained yet fully acknowledged. And in that embrace, I realized something that would stay with me forever. The bond we had formed was not fleeting. It was deep, intentional, and ready to endure if we dared take the next step carefully together. The first light of dawn seeped softly through the curtains, painting the apartment in muted golds and gentle ambers. The night's intensity had softened into a tender quiet, a lingering warmth that wrapped around us like a protective cocoon. We were still seated close together on the couch, the blanket long forgotten, our shoulders brushing, foreheads occasionally resting together in silent understanding. The air between us was calm now, but it carried the weight of decisions, of futures yet to be shaped. She looked at me then, fully, honestly, and I could see the clarity in her eyes, the resolve that had formed during the long hours we spent in each other's presence. "I can't keep pretending," she murmured, her voice steady but edged with vulnerability. "I need to be honest with myself, with him, with everything." There was no panic in her tone, only the quiet strength of someone finally willing to face her truth. My heart ached at the knowledge of what she carried, and I reached out, cupping her cheek gently with my hand. Her skin was soft beneath my palm, and the warmth of her gaze met mine, steady and trusting. "I'll wait," I whispered, my voice low and certain. "I'll be here, whatever you need, whenever you're ready. You don't have to rush, and you don't have to fear." The words hung in the air like a promise, an anchor to the bond we had nurtured so carefully. Her eyes glistened with gratitude, and she leaned into my touch, letting her forehead rest against mine. The moment was simple, yet monumental, a culmination of every small gesture, every laugh, every brush of skin, every shared secret from the nights before. We talked quietly, carefully, about what the future might hold. Not in detail, not in plans or timelines, but in assurances that trust and patience would guide us, that emotional honesty would remain our compass, and that nothing would be forced. I listened to her speak, every word laden with thoughtfulness and care, and I felt a profound sense of peace. Here, in the early morning light, the pull of temptation and the weight of desire had transformed into something deeper. Mutual respect, quiet understanding, and the beginnings of a love built not on urgency, but on intention. Then, in a moment that felt both intimate and sacred, she lifted her hand to my cheek, brushing her thumb along my jawline. I leaned into the touch, letting the warmth of her hand seep into me. Our eyes met, and without words, we acknowledged everything that had passed between us. The tension, the longing, the trust, and the unspoken promise of what was to come. I pressed my forehead gently against hers, breathing in the faint scent of her hair and the soft traces of her perfume, feeling the calm steadiness of her heartbeat against my chest. Before I left, she gave me a soft, lingering kiss on the cheek, a kiss full of promise, not secrecy, full of intention, not haste. It was a small gesture, yet it carried the weight of everything we had shared, the slow-burn connection, the quiet honesty, the unshakable trust. We smiled at each other, a shared understanding passing between us, knowing that while the night had ended, our story was only just beginning. As I stepped back, taking one last glance at her illuminated by the morning light, I realized that real love is not stolen in hurried moments. It is chosen patiently, tenderly, and with full awareness. And in that choice, in that mutual promise, we found a quiet happiness that was far more powerful than passion alone. It was enduring. It was ours.